One person had their father basically kidnapped and taken across the country. And then the woman got ill and had to lose track of her plan, so had to give up on it and dumped him back on the doorstep at 2:00 in the morning. She just couldn't deal with it anymore.
What if someone you loved got married and you didn't find out until after they died? Overnight, everything changed. Their will could be revoked, their assets could pass to someone else, their family could lose not only their inheritance, but even the right to decide how their loved one is laid to rest. I'm Richard Port, an award-winning family lawyer, and welcome to Let's Talk About Family Law, unmuting the conversation one story at a time. Today I'm joined by campaigner Daphne Franks to discuss predatory marriage, why so few people have heard of it, and whether the law does enough to protect vulnerable people and their families. So, let's talk about it.
Let's talk. I've got something for you and you've got something for me. A simple little back and forth, nothing to it, you see. Life could be a beach with a cool breeze by the sea if we just set ourselves free. So let's talk.
For people hearing the term predatory marriage for the first time, Daphne, what actually is it?
It's a term that we borrowed from Canada. When we started using it, hardly anyone in this country was using it. And it's generally defined as when a younger person marries an older person who lacks capacity or is vulnerable in some other way, but basically who lacks capacity to marry, with the express intention of gaining access to their estate upon their death. Although I have to say, I've done a lot of research on it, and it's not just about the estate, it's about control as well. And there's a lot of control. But that's what predatory marriage is generally defined as.
So it's mainly elderly people who are vulnerable who are targeted, would you say?
Yeah, elderly people who are on their own and who are lonely. And actually, a lot of elderly people are lonely because their partners died or whatever. There's something about old age that brings vulnerability. And I think predators really hone in on that.
So for people who may not know your story, Daphne, how did you become involved in campaigning around this issue?
It happened to my mother back in 2015. She died in 2016. And we had been really worried about the man who had moved in with her really suddenly. He just met her, moved in within, a month. We'd been to all the authorities asking for help. As I say, we lived next door. We saw her all the time. He started off very friendly, very over-friendly. Then, 2 days after her death, we found out he had taken her off in complete secrecy 5 months before she died and married her. And she never knew she was married because she was nearly 92 and she had advanced vascular dementia. So she didn't know, she hadn't a clue. He didn't give her a new wedding ring. She was still wearing my dad's wedding ring. And this was so shocking that I thought, something needs to be done about this. And if it was so easy to do, and if nobody noticed or pulled up on anything that she didn't understand what was going on, I think we thought, I bet other people are doing it. And then we set up a website and started hearing from loads of people.
You don't really think of it as an issue in society, though, because you don't think people would actually do such a thing. You've got a vulnerable person that can't actually talk back. And again, in your scenario, it's your experience and your opinion as to what you're saying is the situation. There must be dozens of cases out there in the UK. Has anyone ever been convicted for this?
No, it's forced marriage. It's there in the forced marriage legislation. It's forced marriage if you marry someone whose capacity is so low that they don't have capacity to marry, and if you know it. But proving that is just about impossible because the capacity bar for marriage is very low, though nobody's ever quite explained what it is. And there's no evidence kept at marriage. There's no video recordings. There's no audio recordings. So the theory seems to be, what if my mum made a miracle recovery from her 5 years of diagnosed vascular dementia on the day of the marriage? Of course, she didn't. Our MP actually asked Parliament recently in a question, have there been any prosecutions for forced marriage with dementia? And back came the reply, well, we don't separate them out. But I've just looked at the forced marriage statistics and it all seems to be the normal definition or the accepted definition of forced marriage, which is people are actually bullied into it who don't want to be there, young ladies from overseas, that kind of thing. Whereas my mum was smiling happily on the day. So the registrars, who aren't trained in mental capacity or in safeguarding, just assumed she understood. But she smiled happily all the time. That's what some people with dementia do. She realised very early on in her dementia that if you smile and just go, oh, yes, and reply very happily to everything, nobody ever asks you another question.
The issue you've got, though, Daphne, is that no capacity assessments are carried out for marriage, are they? I know you have your interviews before you get married, and they ask you the question, is that person related to you in any shape or form? That's the kind of the bog standard, but there's no actual questions to say, do you have capacity to be wed?
No, that's two problems you've highlighted there. There's no robust set of questions. We would like there to be a set of questions. If you get one wrong, this marriage has to be paused for a capacity assessment, and you have to go off and have a capacity assessment. My mum, for example, we know she didn't know her address, she didn't know her date of birth. All those are big red flags and should have resulted in the wedding being stopped. But the procedures are not robust enough. People have said to me, everyone should have a capacity assessment before they're married. No, I think that's a terrible idea.
It would delay the process, wouldn't it, for marriage indefinitely?
And it's also civil liberties, This country believes in marriage, and actually I'll just seize this moment to say so do I. I've been married for nearly 46 years, but you should have to have capacity. For me, the way to do it is robust safeguarding at marriage, and that is not happening, but it is getting better. There is a lot more awareness.
What we've got to remember, though, Daphne, at the same time, this is from your experience, your opinion as to it all. What happened when your mother sadly passed away? What was the consequences then to your family?
The consequence was that he inherited basically the first 270,000 of her estate, which in her case was all of it. So he just inherited everything she owned. But the thing that is even more distressing, everything in her house he inherited. And if you think about that, there was nothing valuable in the house, nothing he wanted. But there were things like my granddad's letters that he sent from the trenches in the First World War to my grandma. My wedding dress happened to be in the house because years before, Mum had said, I'll look after it for you with the best well-meaning in the world. They were all in the house. On the other massive thing is the marriage gave him complete rights to my mother's funeral. So he could decide when and where it was, what kind of funeral, burial, cremation. She'd always wanted to be cremated. He had her buried. And so he'd had no obligation to invite us to the funeral or to tell us when it was or where it was.
I was going to say, did you manage to attend the funeral at all?
No, we didn't know when or where it was. We tracked down the grave by ringing round the Parks and Cemeteries department till we got the grave number. It's basically a patch of grass. It's still a patch of grass. We're not allowed to put up a headstone because he owns the grave plot. So whenever I see that patch of grass, it's like a monument to injustice to me.
So she was your mother. And regardless whether she was a wife to him, and like I say, I'm not saying yes or no, that's your opinion as to what the situation is, but at the same time, on a moral level, she's your mum. And if you want to put a headstone up, as long as you're not putting anything weird and wonderful up, then that should be your choice in order to celebrate how amazing your mum was.
Absolutely. I just want a simple headstone loved by all.
Going back in relation to your mum, so your mum passed away. She'd got married. Did she have a will in place?
She did a proper will via a solicitor in 2004, and my father did one at the same time. My dad died in 2008. They both did their wills, and they were very straightforward, simple wills, leaving everything to their children. That would be me living next door and my brother Michael.
So as a result of the marriage then, Daphne, under the Wills Act, because your mum got married, that would mean any wills that she had in place, how amazing wills they are, they become invalid, because once the marriage then takes place, it then is as if those wills never existed. So that's what's happening in your case. And I imagine it's happened to so many other people, because it's not something that's really well known, is it? Especially when you get a will, you assume that it's absolutely fine, but you don't realise that when you get married, that invalidates it.
Believe me, I've had people arguing with me in the early days of the campaign. Oh, no, Daphne, you've got it wrong. Your will's your will. Nothing happens when you get married. Carpenters kind of say, no, 1837 Wills Act, otherwise known as the New Wills Act, marriage revokes a will. So I try explaining to people, if you make a will and then you get married, unless it's a very special type of will called a will in contemplation of marriage, then your will is gone. You're not told when you're going to get married. You're not told at the pre-marriage interview. You're not told in the blurb that they give you. You're just not told. And actually, when I asked registrars, why can't you just have a big sign in the office, this marriage will revoke any will you may have made? Well, they said, no, we can't do that, but they're not quite sure why. And why can't you tell people when you marry? Registrars always say, we can't give legal advice. And if they said, this marriage revokes your will and therefore you must make another will, that is legal advice.
Yeah, I can see it being legal advice in that sense. But on the other hand, it's more of a situation of common sense, isn't it? It's telling people that the sky is blue. It's not really advising them specifically on their case and saying, by the way, that will that you've got, that's going to be invalidated if you get married. It is just making a general statement to say, by the way, if you have got a will, and I don't know if you have got a will, it's invalidated as a result of the Wills Act 1837. So again, from your own research, is this a common issue that people are facing then? That predatory marriage is, again, it's not something that I'd heard of until I'd found you online, Daphne, but is it a common problem? Are there more and more vulnerable people heading into predatory marriage without knowing the consequences to them and to their families?
Well, put it like this, nobody's collating any statistics on there been no prosecutions, so it's really hard to know how many cases about that. I have done nearly 350 talks now. At every single talk I have done, somebody has come forward to me in some way and said, oh, that happened in our family, but we couldn't do anything about it. Yesterday, I did a talk for a farmers' charity. And if you think of farmers, they're quite alone, aren't they? They're down a long country lane in the middle of nowhere. They're very vulnerable and they've got a lot of very valuable land. So this wasn't a very big group. And this was actually the people in charge of safeguarding farmers, not farmers themselves. But because a lot of them were associated with farming families, two of them in the meeting said, yep, that happened in our family. And the organizer said it very nearly happened in our family. There are two things. That big legal incentive, marriage revokes a will, which the general public don't know about, but oh boy, the predators do. And the other thing is the lack of safeguarding at marriage. And those are the two things we've been trying to alter. The lack of safeguarding at marriage, if they had a set list of questions, as I said, with the absolute set in stone thing that if you can't answer this question, the marriage must be referred for a capacity assessment. That would do it. But a capacity assessment for everyone is a terrible idea. The problem is registrars, if you Google how to be a registrar, it's all about giving a couple a lovely time and having a wonderful time. And it's all nice and cuddly. Nothing about safeguarding the elderly. They don't regard, or anyone else, they don't regard that as part of their jobs. But they've suddenly had it dropped on them and they've suddenly begun to realise, which is why I've spoken to lots of groups of registrars and they've all been very, very sympathetic, because they can be paid not much more than minimum wage. So if you want a solicitor to assess capacity, how much would that cost you? But a registrar has to do it in 5 minutes by a technique best described as guesswork.
Isn't a registrar, they're basically a civil servant though, aren't they?
It's not a profession, it's a job. You kind of learn how to do it by, you just watch a wedding and then you do a wedding. That's kind of, And they are bringing in more training. I don't want to be flippant about this. They do have training in sham marriage, for example, marriage for immigration purposes. But even that is fairly recent. One registrar said, oh, well, there's no need for safeguarding because that's what the witnesses are for. They are really not for that. The witnesses are just there to go, did this wedding happen? Yes, it did. Not, was it accurate?
So what you're saying is the registrars are passing on the responsibility of safeguarding. Witnesses are normally just a general public. It's your friends that have turned up to come. If they're not your friends and they're just people that have just been hired to just witness, as you say, then they're not going to shout up at all, are they really?
Witnesses are not there for safeguarding. And in fact, no, registrars don't think they are either. I think the problem has been civil registration is run by the General Register Office, which is based in Southport, which is kind of up close a bit from Liverpool. It's not a well-known place. It's not the hub. And it's ploughed its own lonely furrow for many years. And I think until I started pestering them about this issue, they haven't really thought about it. And they're not trained in mental capacity or safeguarding. They don't know anything about that. So it's not their fault. This is the point. Many people say the registrars should have stopped it. Yes, they should. If you're not trained on what to say to stop it, registrars have told me it's very scary sometimes. They're often the only people in the building on a Saturday morning. So there's them and an expectant wedding party. And if they do want to pause a wedding, they have been threatened with everything from being sued for the cost of the honeymoon to physical violence. Registrars need to be trained in what do you say to stop a wedding. And they haven't had that training. And it's really difficult for them. One of the other cases I've become very friendly with, they got their predator who was female from the pages of the Lady magazine. They advertised in the Lady for a carer. Because this is one of the things, the predators are either sometimes paid carers or sometimes they just describe themselves as a carer. She turned up and she was charming. And so they employed her. And then she just showed her true colours very quickly, married the father, took him off to New Zealand to marry him. So nobody knew anything about it. I tell you that the stories I hear on a near weekly basis are absolutely shocking. One person had their father basically kidnapped and taken across the country. And then the woman got ill and had to lose track of her plan. So had to give up on it and dumped him back on the doorstep at 2:00 in the morning. She just couldn't deal with it anymore. It is shocking. It's abuse of the elderly.
Going back to that, predatory marriage in itself then, would you class that as an actual abuse? Regardless of whether it's abuse of the elderly, is it a form of domestic abuse?
Yes, it's a form of domestic abuse. Most definitely it is. And therefore, I have been working with all the charities of the elderly, organisations like the Anne Craft Trust, which deals with domestic abuse. It's financial abuse, but it's also emotional abuse. There are other problems in that social services in England and Wales have no right of entry into the house. So we went to social services at one point. The social workers turned up. I don't think he let them in. I had said, please look upstairs, because we had found out he didn't want us to go upstairs in the house. But at one point we actually turned up and he wasn't there, which was really rare. So my brother rushed upstairs with his phone and took pictures of the upstairs, which was a hoarder's den. It was just, he'd moved mum out of her bedroom, put her in a much smaller bedroom, jackets everywhere, total mess. So we said to social services, we are really worried about this man. Can you please investigate? So they came to the door. I don't know if he did let them in, it was only into the living room, which was all sort of twinkly lights and looked fine. But they never went upstairs. And they just said, they rang me and they said, no, there's nothing to worry about, no safeguarding concerns. And again, I'm not blaming social services. They're incredibly overstretched. Mum was clean. She was well fed. They noted those points. In Scotland, social workers can just go in the house. It's not always easy for them. But I've done a lot of talks in Scotland and they say, we could have just gone straight in. In England, social workers can't do that.
But you're telling me we've got registrars, we've got solicitors, we've got police, and we've got the social services. Everyone that you assume has got the power to do something to stop something like this. No one's got the bite to be able to stop or intervene. You mentioned about the registrars, about the fact they've been threatened with physical violence or threatened that they'll be sued if they stop a marriage. But again, they shouldn't ever have to worry about that. They shouldn't ever have to be concerned that if I stop and do my job and stop this marriage, because it shouldn't be happening, there's going to be consequences to me, because all they're doing is safeguarding. All social services are doing, if they enter a house because they've got concerns, all they're doing is safeguarding. The police, they're safeguarding in a way. But I think from the conversation we're having, Daphne, is that no one wants to get involved because they're concerned about the debate, isn't it? It's the debate of, is it love or is it money? Is this actually free will and they're getting married because they want to be married and they love each other and it's all genuine? Or is it the other way around, like we're explaining here, that is it predatory marriage? And it's a very fine line to be able to kind of look and see and determine whether that's the case. Would you agree?
I would. But I would also say, if you had robust procedures at marriage, the man's motives wouldn't matter. If he was the nicest man in the world and he did love her, my point is, she was not fit to marry. They should have been able to live together happily if they're in a happy relationship, but they shouldn't have been able to marry because marriage has such legal consequences. Of course, if you did away with those legal consequences, as the planned reforms are proposing to do, if you stopped marriage revoking a will, then that would be a big step forward. Obviously, if marriage doesn't revoke a will, you need to think about that, and you might want to alter your will. You might want to, for example, the problem that is always raised to me is you marry a lady called Mary and then you get married again and you forget, you don't change your will, and then you die and all your money goes to Mary and your poor second wife is left out of it. So people need to be encouraged. I mean, my conclusion to all this is people need to make a new will. Make a will. When you're doing a big life event like marriage, it's not just all about lovey-dovey, we all love each other. There's a lot of financial consequences to it either way, and people need to think about that.
I best get a will, Daphne, to be honest. This is kind of food for thought. I think I need one. Going back to the families, what are the warning signs you would tell people to look out for? Red flags, so to speak.
Red flags, there's a whole list of them, but the key ones is predator turns up out of nowhere. You don't know who they are, and the first you know about it, they're all over your loved one. Love bombing them is a very common thing.
Just for anyone who's listening, Daphne, what is love bombing?
Love bombing is when you, in order to get something out of it, you give someone lots of presents and loads of attention and that make them feel really special and wanted, and that's what they do. They move in very swiftly and suddenly you're left going, oh my goodness, this has happened. And you're not sure what to make of it. They convinced everyone you've ever met how marvellous they are. There's always a lot of trying to isolate them from the family, and then they try to isolate the loved one. And the way they do that, a lot of people have told me this, is they start keeping the door locked. Predatory marriage is the sharp end of it, but sometimes people just get access to the bank account and empty it. They do that.
And that's a whole different kettle of fish, isn't it, really?
A whole different, but it's all part of the same syndrome.
Daphne, for anyone who's listening, and if they are worried about their loved ones, what should they do in their scenario?
Several things you can do. The legal thing is, if you're worried about a possible predatory marriage, and we were not told about this, you can get a caveat in expectation of marriage. Even some solicitors don't know about that, because you don't do it via a solicitor. You do it via the registrar. You go to your local register office and say, I want a caveat in expectation of marriage. And it's not foolproof. The decision on the day is still down to the registrars, but it alerts them to the fact that somebody is worried that somebody might try and marry their elderly loved one. And that is free. And again, it's not shared between different register offices. So if you're living in Nottingham, you have to think, oh, well, which register office is he going to use or is she going to use? But it's a start. But I would recommend not hanging around. If your gut is telling you there's something wrong, go to social services and say vulnerable adults. One of the trigger phrases, really vulnerable adult dementia, and go to the police. And again, the police don't always understand. Undue influence is one of the big issues here. And undue influence, as any policeman will tell you, well, it's really hard to prove. It is. One of the predatory marriage cases actually won her case for undue influence. Her name is Jill Langley. And that is a really interesting in that she won. But it was still an absolute nightmare. And until a couple of weeks ago, the predator was still in her father's house and she was still trying to get him out. And that was, a couple of years after winning the case. So she always says, I won the case, but it was the mental stress was phenomenal. And that's the thing that I really can't emphasize enough. The distress to the families is just horrendous.
Absolutely. Because again, you can imagine a lot of people feel powerless in this situation. Do you think that the power that these predators have comes in the fact of silence? Because again, we've had this conversation. It's not really a topic that many people discuss. It's not really a topic that many people really know about until it kind of hits on their doorstep. So do you feel these predators gain power from the silence of people not speaking out and talking about it publicly?
Yeah, the title of my talk is Predatory Marriage, a Hidden Crime. And it's hidden. And there's a bit of, and I'm going to put this in inverted commas, but somebody said it in the talk yesterday, the problem is nobody cares about old people. If there's a lot of safeguarding for children, and so there should be, but not enough for the elderly. And it's not true that nobody cares about old people, but where are the votes in it for the government, And dementia, I think one thing I haven't said is people do not understand about dementia. And it's just that lack of knowledge. If you think about a wedding ceremony, there's a lot of repeating, and a lot of people with dementia can repeat. And there's no checking of understanding. And that's what there needs to be.
Do you believe then probably the issue is lack of training for these professionals that, like you've said, no one really understands dementia?
It's a training issue, very much so. But actually, do you know what? Dementia, and it's not clear cut. Many people with dementia would have capacity to marry because in the early stages, they would have perfectly enough capacity to marry. And my mum did open the front door to him. She said to me was that she was doing some gardening. She was always out there gardening. And he walked past and she invited him in for a cup of tea. Perhaps she did. She had dementia then, but it wasn't as bad. And maybe that was correct, or maybe it wasn't, but maybe she misremembered. Because another thing people with dementia do is they fill in the gaps in their memory. They kind of hallucinate that something has happened when it hasn't. But either way, she will have let him in.
What you've also got to remember, though, Daphne, is that there'll be a debate between people. And like we said before, is it love or is it money? And you can imagine that if someone's parents get remarried or they've got a new partner later in life, that there would be a concern as to whether that person's going to be taking money or they're going to be exploiting them in some weird and wonderful way. So would you agree that in some scenarios, yes, absolutely predatory marriage. In others, we can't just kind of blanket every marriage is a predatory marriage, that there is that love aspect to some.
Some there is. And believe me, I've had the criticism. I went on a television program and they quoted the clip on the social media and most of the comments were really sympathetic, but there was just one who said, she is nothing but an entitled, money-grabbing adult brat. And I thought, oh, nice. And that is why I have always made it very clear that our campaign is not about our lost inheritance. I'm sad about the lost inheritance, but because both my parents were from very poor backgrounds, they both really worked to have any penny they've got. So to have it taken away by someone is terrible. But we have always worked, my husband and I, so we weren't relying on the inheritance. So my whole point is, To us, that was not so important. What is important is the principle of the thing.
Do you feel that the issue of protecting the vulnerable elderly is being taken more seriously now?
Yeah, do, definitely. I was speaking at a conference in Chicago a couple of weeks ago, and I was part of a whole morning of presentations about predatory marriage. It's a global issue. They have worked out that it is a global safeguarding issue. The number of people with dementia, everyone's living longer, a lot of people living longer. Number of people with dementia has shot up like crazy. And so it's not just predatory marriage, of course. It's exploitation of the elderly in every possible way. And it is beginning to be taken more seriously.
Daphne, we're coming to the end. I'll be sad to see you go. It's been an amazing time talking to you, and kind of the inspiration that you're giving and campaigning to help these vulnerable elderly people. For people who are listening and who have listened to what you've said, what would you say to them who are going through this situation, or they've got concerns? What would you tell them to help them move forward?
I have spoken to registrars who have stopped predatory marriages simply by interviewing the couple separately. So that is absolutely great. There was an old lady, they said, do you know why you're here? And she said, no, why am I here? So that was the end of that. So the registrars are a lot more aware. The law will change. I'm determined it will change. They are working on it. At the moment, the Law Commission has proposed that the 1837 Wills Act should be repealed and that there will be legal progress. So legal progress and safeguarding progress are happening. It will be sorted. Perhaps not in my lifetime, but it is getting sorted.
Well, definitely, you're a force to be reckoned with, to be really honest. You're like a bulldozer. I'd be scared if I was part of the government and not making any change. Where can people who are listening to you find your information, get your support if they're in that situation, they've got concerns about their parents or loved one?
Our website, Predatory Marriage UK. If you Google predatory marriage, you'll find a million contact numbers and articles and things. You'll certainly find my contact details, and please get in touch with me. I have listened to a lot of people. Sometimes just listening and being validated helps. And contact social services very early. And so most social services now have heard of predatory marriage, so get in touch with social services. Caveat in expectation of marriage and the legal route. But just trust your gut instinct, I think. There are predators out there, and there are a lot of red flags to watch out for, and do look out for the red flags. Yeah, I'd like to end on a positive note. Many elderly people should marry and find more happiness. And even with dementia, some people are fit to marry in the early stages of dementia. What we need are more robust procedures to make sure that people don't slip through the net.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining me today, Daphne. It's been really, really interesting, and a lot of important information, stuff that many people don't actually know. And it's a topic that many people don't really hear much about. So it's so important, the work that you're doing in campaigning and helping protect elderly people. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to talk to you. It's been really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for listening. And a big thank you also to Daphne Franks for joining me to discuss predatory marriage, an issue that remains largely unknown and too rarely discussed, despite the important questions it raises for families and professionals. If today's episode has made you think about any of the issues we discussed, then please follow the podcast and share this episode with someone you think might be interested in hearing it. The more of us who understand these difficult issues, the better informed our conversations can be. I've been yours truly, Richard Paul, and this has been Let's Talk About Family Law. I'm muting the conversation one story at a time. So, let's talk about it.
And let's talk. I've got something for you and you've got something for me. A simple little back and forth, nothing to it, you see. Life could be a beach with a cool breeze by the sea if we just set ourselves free. So let's talk. I've got something for you and you've got something for me. A simple little back and forth, nothing to it, you see. Life could be a beach with a cool breeze by the sea if we just set ourselves free. So let's talk. So yeah, just to be clear, I'm not advocating sort of creepy harassment or something, or just being jolly all the time. That's actually appalling in my mind. Just basic human interaction, you know. Hello, how are you? Lovely. Okay, bye.